The lot was empty when I came back from taking out the trash. Empty. Except for her. She stood at the far edge, just beyond the yellow spill of the street lamp, a woman in a faded white dress, barefoot, her hair hanging wet and heavy across her face. It hadn't rained all night. I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I meant it to. Slowly, she turned toward me. Her eyes caught the light, reflecting it like an animal's in the dark. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She just smiled, wide enough that her cheek strained against it. Then she stepped backward, one slow pace at a time, melting into the black until she was gone. The night was silent, but the air smelled like wet earth. And it was getting stronger, like whatever she was had stepped inside. That was 3 weeks ago. I should have quit right then, walked straight to my beat-up Honda, and driven back to Reading without looking back. But I needed this job. Needed the money more than I needed sleep or peace of mind. My name's Jake Whitehorse, and I've been working the graveyard shift at the Wendy's on Route 299 just outside Burney for 4 months now. It's one of those 24-hour locations that catches truckers heading toward Altura's or late-night stragglers coming back from the casinos in Nevada. The kind of place where normal people don't end up unless they're passing through or running from something. I was running from something. Student loans, mostly, and a court-ordered anger management program back in Sacramento that wasn't going anywhere productive. My cousin Tommy got me the job after I crashed on his couch for 2 weeks. He'd worked here before transferring to the day shift at the McDonald's in Fall River Mills, and he warned me about the weird stuff. "Just follow the rules Joaquin left behind," he'd said, scratching at a tattoo on his forearm. "Don't ask questions, don't get creative, and you'll make it to sunrise." Joaquin Valdez had been the previous night shift manager. According to Tommy, he'd worked alone for 3 years without incident until one morning when they found his uniform folded neatly on the counter, his name tag placed on top, and his keys hanging from the register. Security footage showed him walking into the walk-in freezer at 4:23 a.m. He never came out. The cameras caught something else, though. About 20 minutes after Joaquin disappeared, a man in the same uniform started working the register, serving the few customers who drifted in before dawn. Same height, same build, even wore the name tag. But when day shift arrived, he was gone too. That's when they found the list taped inside the office desk drawer. 7 rules written in Joaquin's handwriting, along with a note that said, "For whoever comes next." I thought it was some elaborate prank when I first read them. Now I know better. Now I've seen what happens when you don't follow them exactly. The woman in the white dress was just the beginning. My first week passed without incident. Tommy had shown me the basics during a rushed afternoon training session: how to work the fryer, clean the soda machine, and lock up the register. Standard fast food stuff. He mentioned the rules again as he was leaving, but seemed reluctant to elaborate. "They're in the office," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Read them your first night. Don't think they're a joke." The Wendy's sat at the junction where Route 299 met Tamarack Road, surrounded by ponderosa pines that creaked in the mountain wind. During the day, it looked like any other fast food restaurant. At night, with only the red neon sign casting light across the empty parking lot, it felt different. Smaller, more contained. I found the list during my 3rd shift, taped inside the bottom drawer of the manager's desk, like Tommy had said. 7 rules written in careful block letters on yellow legal paper. Night shift protocols, Wendy's Route 299. Never serve anyone who orders only a large Frosty after 2 a.m. Tell them the machine is broken. They will leave. If you hear knocking from the walk-in freezer, ignore it. Do not open the door until sunrise. Clean the dining area floor between 3:15 and 3:30 a.m. Use only the red mop bucket If the water turns black, dump it in the parking lot, not the sink. The woman in the white dress may return. If she approaches the drive-through window, serve her a small vanilla frosty and a kid's meal. Do not speak to her. Do not look directly at her face. Keep the radio tuned to 98.3 FM after midnight. If the signal cuts out, leave the building immediately and wait in your car until it returns. The bathroom lights must remain on all night. If they flicker or go out, replace the bulbs immediately. Do not use the bathroom while the lights are off. If someone claiming to be Joaquin Valdez comes to work, let him in. He will handle everything until dawn. Do not ask questions. I read the list 3 times, waiting for the punchline. Some of the rules seemed random. Why that specific radio station? Others felt more ominous, especially the one about Joaquin. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket, figuring I'd play along with whatever elaborate hazing ritual this was supposed to be. The first rule came into play on my 6th night. I was restocking napkin dispensers when headlights swept across the dining room windows. A pickup truck pulled into the drive-through lane, an older Chevy with primer spots along the fender. The driver leaned out, and I caught a glimpse of pale skin and dark hair before heading to the window. "Welcome to Wendy's. What can I get for you tonight?" "Large frosty." The voice was flat, almost toneless. "Vanilla." I glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. "Sorry, our frosty machine is down for cleaning right now. Can I get you something else?" Silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. The truck's engine idled rough, like it needed a tune-up. Finally, without another word, the driver pulled away. The taillights disappeared around the curve toward Bernie, leaving me alone with the hum of the soda machine and the distant whisper of wind through the pines. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe someone really did want a frosty at 2 in the morning. But something about the interaction felt wrong. The way the driver hadn't seemed surprised when I said the machine was broken, like they'd expected that exact response. The radio crackled from the kitchen, where I'd tuned it to 98.3 FM as instructed. Classic rock mostly, with a late-night DJ who spoke in the slow, measured cadence of someone trying to fill dead air between songs. I found the sound comforting as I worked through the routine of closing duties that would stretch until dawn. At 3:15, I filled the red mop bucket with hot water and pine sol, the smell sharp and astringent in the enclosed space. The dining area wasn't particularly dirty. We'd only had maybe a dozen customers since my shift started at 11 p.m. But I mopped anyway, working in methodical squares across the tile. The water stayed clear the entire time. I was starting to think this might be a normal night when I heard the sound from the freezer. Not quite knocking, more like something shifting inside, boxes settling or falling over. I paused, mop in hand, listening. The sound came again, rhythmic and purposeful. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks. Rule number 2 echoed in my mind. If you hear knocking from the walk-in freezer, ignore it. Do not open the door until sunrise. I forced myself to keep mopping, concentrating on the circular motions of the mop head against the floor. The knocking continued for several minutes before stopping abruptly. When I finally looked up, I noticed my reflection in the dark windows looked pale and strained. 4 hours until sunrise. I checked the radio, still playing, still tuned to 98.3. The bathroom lights glowed steady and bright. So far, so good. The bathroom lights went out at 3:47 a.m. I was wiping down tables when the dining area suddenly dimmed. The fluorescent tubes over the restroom had gone dark, leaving that corner of the restaurant in shadow. According to Rule 6, I needed to replace the bulbs immediately. I found a stepladder in the storage closet, along with a box of replacement tubes. The bathroom felt colder than the rest of the building as I worked, my breath forming small puffs in the air. As I unscrewed the plastic cover, I tried not to think about why this rule existed in the first place. Both bulbs had burned out simultaneously, which seemed odd but not impossible. I'd seen stranger things working maintenance jobs before moving to California. I screwed in the new tubes and flicked the switch. Light flooded the small space, revealing nothing out of the ordinary. Just white tile, a mirror that needed cleaning, and the faint smell of industrial disinfectant. But as I was putting away the latter, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. In the mirror's reflection, someone stood behind me. I spun around to find empty air. When I looked back at the mirror, my own face stared back, pale and tired. Nothing else. I packed up the supplies quickly and returned to the front counter, where the radio continued its late-night programming. The DJ was talking about road conditions on Highway 89, warning drivers about black ice near Lassen Peak. Normal, mundane information that helped ground me after whatever had just happened in the bathroom. The next few hours passed quietly. A trucker stopped for coffee and a burger around 4:30, paying an exact change and leaving without conversation. An older woman in a Honda Accord ordered 2 breakfast sandwiches at 5:15, mentioning she was driving to Redding for a doctor's appointment. Regular people living regular lives, completely unaware of the weirdness contained within this particular Wendy's. I was starting to relax when the radio signal cut out. The music stopped mid-song, replaced by static that seemed to fill the entire building. I rushed to the radio and checked the dial, still tuned to 98.3, but receiving nothing but white noise. According to Rule 5, this meant I needed to leave immediately and wait in my car until the signal returned. I grabbed my jacket and keys, locked the front door, and hurried across the parking lot to my Honda. The night air felt thick and humid despite the mountain elevation, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, watching the Wendy's through my windshield. At first, nothing appeared different. The red neon sign continued its cycle, the security lights illuminated the empty lot, and the building looked exactly as I'd left it. But gradually, I began to notice subtle changes. The drive-through menu board was cycling through different items that didn't exist on our regular menu. Fish sandwiches with names I'd never heard of, salads made with ingredients that sounded made up, desserts that seemed to shift and change as I watched. The prices were wrong too, showing amounts like $23.47 for a small drink, or $2.03 for a full meal. Through the windows, I could see movement inside the restaurant. Shadows passed between the dining room and kitchen, moving with purpose despite the fact that I'd locked the place up tight. Someone, or something, was working my shift while I sat outside. I checked my phone for the time. 5:52 a.m. Dawn would break soon, and I could return to finish the last hour of my shift. The radio in my car was still tuned to a classic rock station out of Redding, playing Creedence Clearwater Revival at low volume. Normal programming. Normal world. After 20 minutes, I tried tuning to 98.3 on my car radio. The signal came through clearly, some alternative rock song I didn't recognize, but clean and strong. I gathered my courage and walked back to the building. The front door was still locked, exactly as I'd left it. Inside, everything appeared normal. The menu board showed regular Wendy's items at standard prices. The radio in the kitchen was playing the same song I'd heard in my car, and there were no signs that anyone had been inside. But the register showed 3 transactions during the time I had been outside. $8.47, $12.23, and $15.99. All paid in exact change. all occurring between 5:52 and 6:12 a.m. I checked the security camera monitor, hoping to see what had happened. The footage from the past hour showed an empty restaurant. No customers, no movement, nothing. Just my own image locking up and leaving, then returning. The timestamp on the transactions didn't match anything the cameras had recorded. The sun began rising over the pine trees as I tried to process what I'd experienced. Golden light filtered through the dining room windows, making everything look normal and safe again. The weirdness seemed to retreat with the darkness, like it was something that could only exist in the small hours between midnight and dawn. Tommy arrived at 6:30 to relieve me, looking as tired as I felt. He took one look at my face and nodded knowingly. "Rough night?" "The radio went out," I said. "Had to wait outside." "Yeah, that happens sometimes." He checked the register totals, noting the unexplained transactions without comment. "You followed all the rules. Everyone? Good. That's how you make it through." He paused, studying my expression. "It gets easier after the first few weeks. Not normal, but easier. You start to understand that there are things happening here that don't have explanations, and fighting it just makes everything worse." I gathered my jacket and keys, eager to get home and sleep away the strangeness of the night. But as I headed for the door, Tommy called after me. "Jake," the woman in the white dress, "if she comes back, don't try to understand what she is. Just follow Rule 4 exactly. Some of the previous night shift, people tried to get creative, tried to help her or ask questions. That didn't end well." Outside, my Honda looked reassuringly normal in the morning light. I sat for a moment before starting the engine, looking back at the Wendy's. In daylight, with Tommy visible through the windows preparing for the morning rush, it seemed like any other fast food restaurant. The kind of place where the strangest thing that might happen would be a broken ice cream machine or a difficult customer. But I knew better now. I'd seen behind the curtain, experienced the rules in action. Whatever was happening here had been going on long before I arrived, and it would continue long after I left. If I left. The drive home to my apartment in Bernie took 15 minutes through winding mountain roads. I needed sleep, but I kept thinking about those transactions, about shadows moving through an empty building, about the woman in the white dress who might return. 7 rules. 6 nights down. How many more until something went wrong? She came back on my 12th night. I was restocking the condiment station when headlights swept across the parking lot. Through the windows, I watched a figure approach the drive-thru on foot. No car, just someone walking out of the darkness beyond the tree line. Even before she stepped into the light, I knew it was her. The woman in the white dress looked exactly as she had 3 weeks ago. Barefoot, hair hanging wet despite the dry October air. Moving with that same measured pace that suggested she had all the time in the world. She stopped at the drive-thru speaker and stood there, waiting. My heart hammered as I walked to the window, Rule 4 echoing in my memory. Serve her a small vanilla frosty and a kid's meal. Do not speak to her. Do not look directly at her face. I kept my eyes focused on her shoulder as I opened the window. Up close, I could smell wet earth and something else. Something organic and wrong, like flowers left too long in standing water. Small vanilla frosty and a kid's meal, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. That'll be ready in just a minute. She said nothing, didn't move. I prepared her order with shaking hands, hyper-aware of her presence just outside the window. The frosty machine dispensed its contents with its usual mechanical whir, but the sound seemed muffled, distant. The kids' meal, apple slices, milk, and chicken nuggets, went into its colorful box with the Wendy's logo smiling cheerfully up at me. When I returned to the window, she was exactly where I'd left her. I placed the items on the counter between us, still avoiding eye contact. Her hand reached for the food, and I caught a glimpse of pale skin that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. The money she placed on the counter was soaking wet. 3 bills and exact change that left puddles on the stainless steel surface. I took it without comment. Even though every instinct screamed that this wasn't normal currency, the president's faces looked subtly wrong, like photographs that had been underwater too long. She turned and walked away, carrying her order back toward the darkness. I watched until she disappeared beyond the reach of the parking lot lights, then closed the window and tried to steady my breathing. The wet money sat on the counter for another hour before it finally dried. When I checked it later, the bills looked completely normal. Regular 10s and 5s with familiar faces and proper serial numbers. But I could still smell that earthy floral scent on my fingers. I was cleaning the fryer when I heard someone at the front door. Through the glass, a man in a Wendy's uniform stood waiting. Same red shirt, same black visor, same name tag format. But the name read Joaquin in block letters, and the face beneath the visor looked exactly like the employee photo I'd seen in the office files. Joaquin Valdez, the manager who disappeared 4 months ago. Rule 7 was clear. If someone claiming to be Joaquin Valdez comes to work, let him in. He will handle everything until dawn. Do not ask questions. I walked to the door with my keys, my hand trembling as I turned the lock. He stepped inside without acknowledgement, moving past me toward the kitchen with the fluid efficiency of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. His footsteps made no sound on the tile floor. "I'll take over from here," he said without looking at me. His voice sounded normal, not ethereal or distorted, just tired in the way that all night shift workers sound tired. "You can wait in the office." I wanted to ask questions, wanted to know where he'd been, what had happened to him, why he looked exactly the same as he had in photographs from 4 months ago. But the rule was explicit. No questions. So I nodded and retreated to the small office behind the kitchen, leaving him to work. Through the security monitor, I watched him serve customers who shouldn't have existed. The parking lot remained empty, but people approached the counter. A teenage girl in a Letterman jacket from Bernie High School, an elderly man in overalls, a woman with 2 small children who kept pointing at the menu board with excitement. None of them had arrived in cars. None of them cast shadows under the fluorescent lights. Joaquin served them with practiced efficiency, taking orders and preparing food that materialized in the warmers without him having to cook anything. The register rang up sales: $7.23, $14.56, $9.87, all paid with exact change that left no wet spots on the counter. I dozed fitfully in the office chair, jerking awake every time the register chimed or the drive-through timer beeped. Each time I checked the monitor, more customers had appeared, forming orderly lines that extended beyond the camera's view. Business was booming in a way that defied explanation. At 5:30 a.m., I woke to silence. The monitor showed an empty restaurant. No customers, no Joaquin, just the usual overnight lighting and the soft glow of the menu boards. I walked out of the office cautiously, half expecting to find him still working, but the kitchen was deserted. The register showed 43 transactions between 1:15 and 5:27 a.m. Nearly $2,000 in sales, all paid in exact change. The warming trays were fully stocked with fresh food, despite the fact that I hadn't seen Joaquin prepare anything. The grill was clean, the fryer oil was fresh, and every surface had been wiped down to health department standards. On the counter beside the register, I found a folded piece of paper with my name written on the outside. Inside, in the same careful handwriting as the rules, was a single sentence. "Thank you for following the protocols. The burden will be easier now." I thought about what Tommy had said, that it got easier after the first few weeks. Maybe this was what he meant. Maybe the really dangerous part was the testing period, when new employees either learned to follow the rules or joined whatever collection of spirits haunted this place. The relief I felt was tempered by a growing realization. I was adapting to this. The woman in the white dress no longer terrified me, just made me nervous. Joaquin's appearance had been startling, but manageable. I was learning to navigate a world where the normal rules didn't apply, where customer service extended to entities that existed outside conventional reality. When Tommy arrived at 6:30, he took one look at the register totals and nodded approvingly. "Good night." Joaquin showed up. Yeah, he does that sometimes when things get busy. Tommy spoke about our dead predecessor like he was a reliable employee who occasionally picked up extra shifts. Makes the job easier, doesn't it? I realized he was right. Instead of struggling alone through the supernatural encounters, I'd had help. Professional help from someone who understood the rules better than anyone else could. "How long has this been going on?" I asked as I gathered my things. "Here? Maybe 10 years according to the day shift manager. But there are places like this all over Northern California. Highway stops where the regular world gets thin. Most people drive past without noticing anything unusual. But for those who work the night shift..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I drove home through mountain air that smelled like pine needles and wood smoke from early morning chimneys. The Honda's radio played classic rock from Redding, and everything felt reassuringly normal. But I carried the folded note in my pocket, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed some kind of threshold. 12 nights down. The burden would be easier now. But easier didn't mean normal. And I was beginning to suspect that normal was something I might never experience again. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to remember our earlier conversation about following the protocols exactly. But I could see the skepticism in his eyes, the rational part of his mind, trying to process what felt like arbitrary customer rejection. That skepticism would be a problem. At 3:15, I handed him the red mop bucket and explained the floor cleaning routine. He followed the procedure correctly, working through the dining area in steady strokes. The water stayed clear, and nothing unusual happened. Maybe the supernatural elements would remain dormant while he was learning. I should have known better. The knocking from the walk-in freezer started at 3:47 a.m. Marcus was refilling napkin dispensers when the sound began. 3 measured knocks, a pause, then 3 more. He looked toward the kitchen with curiosity rather than alarm. "Someone's in the freezer." "No," I said quickly. "Rule 2. We ignore it." "But what if someone's trapped in there? What if they need help?" The knocking continued, rhythmic and persistent. Marcus set down the napkins and started toward the kitchen. I grabbed his arm. "Do not open that door, under any circumstances." "That's crazy. If someone's..." "Marcus." I used the tone I'd learned from my supervisor at the warehouse job in Sacramento, the voice that cut through arguments and confusion. "I'm training you. This is part of the job. We do not open the freezer door until sunrise." He stared at me, then at the kitchen where the knocking had intensified. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. Like a distress signal that demanded response. "This is insane," he muttered, but he stopped trying to reach the freezer. The knocking continued for another 10 minutes before stopping abruptly. Marcus spent that time pacing behind the counter, shooting anxious glances toward the kitchen. I could see him fighting every helpful instinct he'd developed over 19 years of life. At 4:30, a pickup truck pulled into the drive-thru. Different vehicle than the earlier frosty customer. This one was a red Ford with Nevada plates. The driver ordered 2 breakfast sandwiches and a large coffee, normal items at a normal time. Marcus took the order and prepared the food efficiently, seeming grateful for routine activity after the freezer incident. But as he handed the bag through the window, I noticed something wrong with the customer. The man's face looked normal at first glance, but when he turned toward the light, his features seemed to shift subtly, like someone wearing a mask that didn't quite fit properly. Marcus didn't notice. He made change, thanked the customer, and watched the truck drive away toward Highway 89. Just another satisfied customer as far as he was concerned. "See?" he said as the taillights disappeared. "Some things here are completely normal." I didn't have the heart to tell him that normal customers didn't pay with bills that left damp spots on the counter, or that their eyes didn't reflect light like an animal's when they turned their heads. Some lessons had to be learned through experience. The radio signal cut out at 5:15 a.m. Static filled the kitchen, replacing the classic rock station with white noise that seemed to penetrate every corner of the building. Marcus looked at the radio with annoyance rather than alarm. Should I try to fix it? No. We're leaving. I grabbed my jacket and keys, heading for the front door. Marcus followed reluctantly, clearly unhappy about abandoning the restaurant during work hours. "This is our job," he protested as I locked up. "We can't just walk away because the radio stopped working." Rule 5. When the signal cuts out, we wait in the parking lot until it returns. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, then seemed to remember our earlier conversation about following the protocols exactly. But I could see the skepticism in his eyes, the rational part of his mind trying to process what felt like arbitrary customer rejection. That skepticism would be a problem. At 3:15, I handed him the red mop bucket and explained the floor cleaning routine. He followed the procedure correctly, working through the dining area in steady strokes. The water stayed clear and nothing unusual happened. Maybe the supernatural elements would remain dormant while he was learning. I should have known better. The knocking from the walk-in freezer started at 3:47 a.m. Marcus was refilling napkin dispensers when the sound began. 3 measured knocks, a pause, then 3 more. He looked toward the kitchen with curiosity rather than alarm. "Someone's in the freezer." "No," I said quickly. "Rule 2. We ignore it." "But what if someone's trapped in there? What if they need help?" The knocking continued, rhythmic and persistent. Marcus set down the napkins and started toward the kitchen. I grabbed his arm. "Do not open that door, under any circumstances." "That's crazy. If someone's—" "Marcus." I used the tone I'd learned from my supervisor at the warehouse job in Sacramento, the voice that cut through arguments and confusion. "I'm training you. This is part of the job. We do not open the freezer door until sunrise." He stared at me, then at the kitchen where the knocking had intensified. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause, like a distress signal that demanded response. "This is insane," he muttered, but he stopped trying to reach the freezer. The knocking continued for another 10 minutes before stopping abruptly. Marcus spent that time pacing behind the counter, shooting anxious glances toward the kitchen. I could see him fighting every helpful instinct he'd developed over 19 years of life. At 4:30, a pickup truck pulled into the drive-thru. Different vehicle than the earlier frosty customer. This one was a red Ford with Nevada plates. The driver ordered 2 breakfast sandwiches and a large coffee, normal items at a normal time. Marcus took the order and prepared the food efficiently, seeming grateful for routine activity after the freezer incident. But as he handed the bag through the window, I noticed something wrong with the customer. The man's face looked normal at first glance, but when he turned toward the light, his features seemed to shift subtly, like someone wearing a mask that didn't quite fit properly. Marcus didn't notice. He made change, thanked the customer, and watched the truck drive away toward Highway 89. Just another satisfied customer as far as he was concerned. "See?" he said as the taillights disappeared. "Some things here are completely normal." I didn't have the heart to tell him that normal customers didn't pay with bills that left damp spots on the counter, or that their eyes didn't reflect light like an animal's when they turned their heads. Some lessons had to be learned through experience. The radio signal cut out at 5:15 a.m. Static filled the kitchen, replacing the classic rock station with white noise that seemed to penetrate every corner of the building. Marcus looked at the radio with annoyance rather than alarm. Should I try to fix it? No. We're leaving. I grabbed my jacket and keys, heading for the front door. Marcus followed reluctantly, clearly unhappy about abandoning the restaurant during work hours. "This is our job," he protested as I locked up. "We can't just walk away because the radio stopped working." Rule 5. When the signal cuts out, we wait in the parking lot until it returns. Marcus lasted 3 more shifts before he started questioning everything. "This is bullshit," he said on Friday night, as we finished the 3:30 a.m. floor cleaning. "We're turning away paying customers for no reason. Management would fire us if they knew." I've been expecting this conversation. Every new night shift employee went through the same process. Initial compliance followed by growing resentment as the rational mind rebelled against the arbitrary nature of the rules. Tommy had warned me about it. "Management wrote these rules," I reminded him, securing the red mop bucket in its designated closet. Joaquin Valdez was the night manager for 3 years. He knew what he was doing. Joaquin Valdez disappeared. Maybe he had a breakdown from following crazy protocols that don't make sense. Marcus had been researching during his off hours, asking questions around town about the previous night manager. In a community as small as Bernie, stories traveled fast. He'd heard about the strange circumstances of Joaquin's disappearance, but had drawn the wrong conclusions. "You think he made up the rules because he was having mental health issues?" "I think someone made them up, and we're following them like sheep." Marcus grabbed the sanitizer spray and started wiping down tables with more force than necessary. "Tonight, I'm going to prove their nonsense." "What do you mean?" "Next time someone orders a large Frosty after 2 a.m., I'm going to serve them. When nothing happens, maybe you'll see that this is all psychological manipulation." I tried to explain what I'd witnessed over the past 2 months. The woman in the white dress, the shadows moving through an empty building, the transactions that occurred while we waited outside. But Marcus had rational explanations for everything. Stress-induced hallucinations, faulty security cameras, register malfunctions that could be fixed with proper maintenance. "You've been working alone too long," he said with the confidence of someone who hadn't yet encountered anything his worldview couldn't explain. "Isolation and weird schedules can mess with your perception. I've read about it." The first test came at 2:07 a.m. A motorcycle pulled into the drive-through lane. A Harley-Davidson with saddlebags and Nevada plates. The rider ordered a large chocolate Frosty, and Marcus immediately moved toward the machine before I could intervene. "Our Frosty machine is down for cleaning," I said into the headset, blocking Marcus's path to the soft-serve dispenser. "No, it's not," Marcus said loudly enough for the customer to hear. "I can make that for you right now." The rider's engine revved once, a sound like distant thunder. "Which is it?" The voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once, echoing off the building walls. Marcus stepped around me and began preparing the Frosty, his movements quick and confident. The chocolate syrup dispensed normally, the machine whirred through its cycle, and within 2 minutes, he had a large Frosty ready to serve. "That'll be $3.47, he said as he opened the drive-thru window. The rider reached for the cup with hands that wore black leather gloves. Normal gloves, normal customer. Exactly as Marcus had predicted. He paid with exact change. 3 ones, 2 quarters, and 7 pennies that clinked onto the counter like any other transaction. "Thank you," the rider said, and drove away into the darkness. Marcus turned to me with triumphant satisfaction. "See? Nothing happened. Just a normal customer who wanted ice cream." I wanted to believe him. For a moment, watching the motorcycle disappear around the curve toward Route 89, I thought maybe he was right. Maybe the rules were just elaborate hazing, designing to test new employees' willingness to follow arbitrary instructions. Then I looked at the money on the counter. The bills were damp, as if they'd been underwater. The coins were green with verdigris, aged copper that looked like it had been buried for decades. And when I touched them, they crumbled to powder between my fingers. "Marcus," I said quietly. He was already moving away, triumphant in his victory over superstition. He didn't see the money disintegrate, didn't notice the smell of wet earth that now permeated the entire drive-thru area. He was cleaning the Frosty machine with mechanical efficiency, probably planning how he'd debunk the other rules. I swept the powder into my palm and walked to the back door, dumping it into the gravel parking lot as far from the building as possible. When I returned, Marcus was humming while he worked. Some pop song from the radio that had been playing earlier in the evening. He didn't notice that the radio had been playing only static for the past 20 minutes. The bathroom lights went out at 3:15 a.m. "I'll handle this one," Marcus said, grabbing the stepladder before I could object. Time to prove another rule wrong. He disappeared into the darkened restroom with replacement bulbs and a casual confidence that made me want to scream. Rule 6 existed for a reason, and that reason wasn't arbitrary maintenance schedules. I stood outside the bathroom door, listening to the sounds of Marcus working. Normal sounds. The creak of the stepladder, the snap of fluorescent tubes being installed, the metallic click of the light switch, then silence. "Marcus!" I called. No response. "Marcus, are you okay in there?" Still nothing. I checked my watch. He'd been inside for almost 10 minutes. Changing 2 fluorescent bulbs should take 3 minutes at most. I pushed open the bathroom door. Marcus stood on the stepladder, reaching toward the ceiling fixture with a new bulb in his hand. But he wasn't moving. Not breathing. Not blinking. Just frozen in place, like someone had pressed pause on a video. The light switch was in the off position. The room remained dark, except for the spillover from the dining area fluorescence. Marcus. He didn't respond. I reached for the light switch and flipped it up. The new bulbs flickered to life, illuminating the small bathroom in harsh white light. Marcus blinked and resumed his work as if nothing had happened. He installed the second bulb, climbed down from the ladder, and tested the switch with normal human movements. "There," he said, seeming genuinely pleased with himself. "Fixed. No supernatural intervention required." I stared at him, trying to process what I'd witnessed. "How long were you in here?" "Maybe 3 minutes." "Why?" According to my watch, he'd been frozen for almost 10 minutes, but he showed no awareness of the lost time, no recognition that anything unusual had occurred. Whatever force governed this place had simply paused him until the lights came back on. "Nothing," I said. "Good job." But I was lying. Something had definitely happened. Something that proved the rules weren't arbitrary at all. They were safety protocols designed to protect people from forces that operated outside normal reality. Marcus continued his pattern of selective rule-breaking throughout the night. When we heard knocking from the walk-in freezer at 4:20 a.m., he made a show of ignoring it, but kept glancing toward the kitchen with obvious frustration. When a customer ordered only bottled water and a side salad at 4:45, items that seemed harmless enough, he served them without checking the rules first. Each time, nothing obviously catastrophic happened. The customers received their orders, paid with what appeared to be normal money, and drove away satisfied. Marcus interpreted these successes as vindication of his rational worldview, but I noticed the details he missed. The bottled water customer had no reflection in the drive-through window. The salad was paid for with coins that were ice cold despite the mild October weather. And when I checked the security footage later, neither transaction had been recorded by the cameras. By 5 a.m., Marcus was planning wholesale rebellion against the night shift protocols. "Tomorrow night, I'm going to open the freezer when we hear knocking," he announced as we prepared for the end of our shift. "Whatever's in there probably just needs help. Maybe it's a homeless person who got locked in accidentally." The casual way he said it made my stomach clench. Some rules could be bent or tested with minor consequences. But Rule 2, never open the freezer door until sunrise, felt different, more absolute, more dangerous. "Don't," I said. "Please, just trust me on that one." "Trust you based on what evidence? Everything you've told me about this place sounds like sleep deprivation and too much caffeine." Marcus was gathering his jacket and keys, eager to get home and plan his next bout of rational thinking. "I'm not going to let fear of imaginary consequences prevent me from doing the right thing." Tommy arrived at 6:30 to find me standing alone by the front counter, staring at the walk-in freezer door. Marcus had left 10 minutes earlier, confident in his plans for the following night. "Where's the new guy?" Tommy asked. "He's struggling with the rules." Tommy nodded grimly. "They all do. Some figure it out, some don't." "Which category do you think Marcus falls into?" I thought about the frozen moment in the bathroom, the crumbling coins, the missing reflections and missing camera footage. Marcus hadn't just failed to notice these details. He'd been protected from noticing them. Something was keeping him functional and rational, despite accumulating evidence that should have shattered his worldview. "I think something's decided he's not ready to see what's really happening here," I said. "That's either very good or very bad," Tommy replied. "We'll find out tomorrow night." Marcus arrived for his 5th shift carrying a crowbar. He'd hidden it in his backpack, but I spotted the handle poking out when he bent over to tie his shoes. The metal gleamed dully under the fluorescent lights, and I knew exactly what he planned to use it for. "You can't be serious," I said as Tommy finished the shift handover and headed for his car. "Someone could be trapped in there," Marcus replied, checking his watch. "If we hear knocking tonight, I'm going to investigate. It's the responsible thing to do." I'd spent my day off researching everything I could find about the Wendy's on Route 299. Online forums mentioned strange incidents dating back 7 years. Night shift employees who'd quit suddenly, health department inspections that found nothing wrong but somehow felt unsettling, truckers who swore the restaurant served them food they'd never ordered. But the most disturbing information came from my landlord in Bernie, an older man named Pete Kozlowski, who'd lived in the area his entire life. When I mentioned where I worked, his expression had shifted to something between concern and pity. "That place has problems," he'd said, sipping coffee on his front porch. "Built on bad ground. The Maidu used to avoid that whole stretch of land, said it was where spirits got confused and couldn't find their way home. Then they put a gas station there in the 70s, had to close after 6 months. Too many accidents. Too many people seeing things that weren't there. Restaurant before Wendy's lasted maybe 2 years. According to Pete, 3 night shift workers had disappeared from various businesses on that location over the past decade. Not dramatic disappearances, just people who stopped showing up for work, left their uniforms behind, and were never seen again. The common thread was that they'd all been described as skeptical, rational people who didn't believe in local superstitions. People like Marcus. The early part of our shift passed tensely. Marcus performed his duties with mechanical efficiency, but I could see him listening for sounds from the freezer, anticipating the test he'd planned. Every few minutes he'd glance toward the kitchen, checking the digital clock on the register. At 2:13 a.m., a sedan approached the drive-thru. "Large vanilla frosty," the driver ordered through the speaker system. Marcus moved toward the frosty machine before I could react. "I've got this," he said, already dispensing the frozen treat into a large cup. I didn't try to stop him this time. After his apparent success the previous night, arguing would only strengthen his conviction that the rules were meaningless. But I watched the transaction carefully, looking for details he might miss. The customer paid with $5 bills that looked crisp and new. The car was a recent model Honda Accord with current registration tags. Nothing obviously supernatural about the interaction, just someone wanting ice cream at an unusual hour. But when the car pulled away, I noticed it didn't turn toward either highway. Instead, it continued straight into the forest, its headlights disappearing between trees where no road existed. Marcus was already cleaning the frosty machine, humming contentedly. He hadn't seen the car's impossible exit route, hadn't noticed that the $5 bills on the counter now bore dates from 1987. Small details that suggested reality was more flexible here than it appeared. The knocking started at 3:52 a.m. 3 measured impacts from inside the walk-in freezer, a pause, then 3 more. Marcus set down the spray bottle he'd been using to clean windows and walked purposefully toward his backpack. "Don't," I said, "please. Whatever's in there isn't human." "That's exactly what someone trapped inside would sound like," he replied, retrieving the crowbar. "I'm not going to let fear override basic human decency." The knocking continued, rhythmic and insistent. Marcus approached the freezer door with the crowbar held ready, his face set with determination. I thought about physically stopping him, but he was younger and stronger than me. And part of me, the part that had been following arbitrary rules for 2 months, wanted to know what would happen when someone finally opened that door. "If you're going to do this," I said, "let me get the camera first. Document whatever we find." Marcus nodded, approving of my apparently scientific approach. I retrieved my phone and opened the camera app, though I suspected it wouldn't record anything useful. The security system never captured the supernatural elements that occurred here. He positioned the crowbar against the door seal and looked back at me. "Ready?" The knocking had stopped. Complete silence emanated from the freezer, as if whatever was inside was waiting for the door to open. Marcus pulled the handle. Cold air rushed out, carrying the smell of frozen food and something else. Something organic and wrong, like meat that had been kept too long despite the refrigeration. The interior looked normal at first glance. Wire shelving, cardboard boxes of frozen supplies, hanging sides of beef wrapped in plastic. Then I saw the footprints. Wet footprints led from the back wall to the door, as if someone had been pacing inside the freezer for hours. But the prints were wrong. Too long, with gaps where toes should be, like the impressions left by bare feet that had been stretched or distorted. Marcus stepped inside, crowbar still in hand, following the trail toward the back wall. "Hello? Is someone in here?" His voice echoed strangely in the confined space, bouncing off the walls with harmonics that shouldn't have been possible. I stayed in the doorway, filming despite knowing the footage would probably show nothing unusual. "There's no one here," Marcus called back. "Just some spilled water on the floor, probably condensation from a faulty seal." But I could see what he couldn't. The footprints continued up the back wall, across the ceiling, and down the opposite wall in a complete circle. Whatever had been pacing inside the freezer hadn't been constrained by gravity. Marcus was examining the supply boxes when the door slammed shut. I lunged for the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The electronic lock had engaged, and the keypad on the outside showed a red error light. Through the thick insulation, I could hear Marcus pounding on the inner surface. "Jake! The door's stuck. Get me out of here." I tried the manual override, entered the manager code, even attempted to pry the door open with a spatula from the kitchen. Nothing worked. The freezer had sealed itself with Marcus inside, and no amount of rational problem-solving could free him. His pounding grew more frantic, accompanied by shouting that became increasingly incoherent. After 10 minutes, the sounds changed. Less like someone trying to break out, more like someone running in circles. The impacts moved around the walls in a pattern that matched the footprints I'd seen on the ceiling. At 4:47 a.m., the pounding stopped. I kept trying to open the door for another hour, using every tool I could find in the restaurant. The electronic system remained locked in error mode, and the manual mechanisms seemed to have seized completely. When Tommy arrived at 6:30, he found me sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at the freezer door. "Where's Marcus?" he asked. "Inside the freezer. The door locked when he opened it. I can't get him out." Tommy pulled out his phone and called the day shift manager, explaining the situation in calm, professional terms. Within 20 minutes, a maintenance crew arrived with power tools and hydraulic jacks. They cut through the electronic lock and forced the door open. The freezer was empty. No Marcus, no crowbar, no sign that anyone had been inside except for the wet footprints that led in impossible circles around the walls and ceiling. The supply boxes were undisturbed. The temperature was normal, and the security footage showed nothing after Marcus had entered the freezer. The police came, asked questions, filed reports. I told them exactly what had happened, but they treated it as a missing person case rather than something supernatural. Marcus Lopez had simply vanished during his shift, leaving behind only a backpack and a story that made no rational sense. Tommy drove me home that morning, neither of us speaking until we reached my apartment complex. "The rules exist for a reason," he said finally. "They're not suggestions or guidelines. They're the difference between going home at sunrise and becoming part of whatever haunts that place." I nodded, understanding now why Joaquin had written them down so carefully. Why previous night shift workers had either learned to follow them exactly or disappeared entirely. Will Marcus... I don't know. Some people who break the major rules just vanish. Others become part of the system, helping enforce the protocols for future employees. Tommy stared through the windshield at the mountain peaks, catching morning light. Either way, he's not coming back. That afternoon, I found a new note taped inside the office desk drawer. Same handwriting as the original rules, but the message was different. Position available, night shift assistant. Must be willing to follow established protocols without question. Previous experience preferred, but not required. I worked alone for 2 weeks after Marcus disappeared. Tommy suggested I take some time off, maybe transfer to day shift at another location, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Partly because I needed the money, but mostly because I felt responsible. I'd known the rules, understood their importance, and failed to stop Marcus from breaking the most critical one. The supernatural activity increased after his disappearance. Customers who shouldn't exist appeared more frequently, people who paid with antique coins, spoken languages that predated European settlement, or cast no reflection in the chrome surfaces around the drive-through window. The woman in the white dress visited 3 times in 10 days, always ordering her small vanilla frosty and kids' meal, always paying with soaking wet currency that dried into normal bills. But the most disturbing change was in the freezer itself. The knocking continued every night, but it had evolved. Instead of the simple 3-knock pattern, I now heard complex rhythms that seemed almost like communication. Sometimes it sounded like 2 sets of hands working in coordination, as if Marcus had joined whatever entity had been trapped inside. I never opened the door, never even approached it during the danger hours, but I found myself listening despite my better judgment, trying to decode meaning in the patterns. 3 quick knocks, followed by 2 slow ones, a rapid drumming that lasted exactly 30 seconds. Periods of silence broken by single, measured impacts that felt like heartbeats. On my 14th night alone, the patterns changed again. The knocking spelled out SOS in Morse code. I stood in the kitchen at 3:47 a.m., hearing the 3 short, 3 long, 3 short sequence repeat over and over. Someone inside the freezer was asking for help using an international distress signal that Marcus would have learned in Boy Scouts or high school emergency preparedness classes. My hand reached for the door handle before I caught myself. This was exactly how the rules got broken, through appeals to human decency, through signals that triggered every helpful instinct. But I remembered the wet footprints on the ceiling, the way the door had sealed itself, the empty freezer that showed no trace of Marcus, despite the maintenance crew's thorough search. Whatever was knocking might sound like Marcus, but it wasn't him anymore. I retreated to the front counter and tried to focus on other tasks. The SOS pattern continued for 20 minutes before shifting to something else, a rapid-fire sequence that might have been Jake in Morse code, though I wasn't proficient enough to be certain. At 4:15 a.m., they assigned me a new trainee. Elena Rodriguez arrived during my break, introduced by Tommy, who seemed relieved to have found someone willing to work the night shift. She was maybe 25, with the quiet confidence of someone who'd worked various jobs since high school. Her application listed experience at truck stops and 24-hour diners, places where weird customers and unusual requests were part of the routine. "Jake will train you on the night protocols," Tommy explained. "Follow his instructions exactly, and you'll do fine." After Tommy left, I retrieved the rules from the office drawer. Elena read through them with the same expression Marcus had shown. Confusion, followed by skepticism, followed by concern. "These seem pretty specific," she said. "Is this place haunted or something?" "Something," I confirmed. "The rules keep us safe. Every single one. Every single night. No exceptions." Helena folded the paper and put it in her pocket. "I've worked stranger places. There was a truck stop outside Bakersfield where management required us to serve coffee to anyone who came in wearing a specific type of hat, even if they didn't order anything. Never found out why, but the paychecks cleared." Her practical acceptance was refreshing after Marcus's intellectual rebellion. Elena approached the night shift like any other service job, with unusual customer requirements. When the first large frosty order came at 2:23 a.m., she told the customer our machine was down without questioning the logic. "Weird time to want ice cream anyway," she commented as the car drove away. The bathroom lights failed at 3:30 a.m., and Elena handled the replacement efficiently. She noticed the temperature drop inside the restroom, mentioned it seemed colder than the rest of the building, but didn't attribute any supernatural significance to the observation. When the radio signal cut out at 4:45 a.m., she grabbed her jacket without argument. "Power issues?" she asked as we sat in my Honda, watching the empty restaurant. Something like that. We observed the same phenomena I'd witnessed during previous signal outages. The menu board cycling through impossible items, shadows moving through empty dining areas, register transactions occurring without customers. Elena watched it all with the detached interest of someone observing a technical malfunction. "Electrical problems can cause weird effects," she said. "Place I worked in Fresno had faulty wiring that made the cash register ring up sales randomly. Management never fixed it because the phantom transactions always balanced out somehow." Her rational explanations reminded me of Marcus, but with a crucial difference. Elena wasn't trying to prove the rules wrong. She was simply applying familiar logic to unfamiliar situations. She followed the protocols because they were part of the job, not because she believed in supernatural consequences. When we returned to the building, Helena noticed the register totals without surprise. "Ghost sales," she said matter-of-factly. "I'll make a note for the day shift manager." We were cleaning up for the end of our shift when the freezer door opened by itself. Elena was refilling napkin dispensers when I heard the soft click of the electronic lock disengaging. The heavy door swung open slowly, revealing the dark interior. Cold air spilled out, carrying that familiar smell of wet earth and organic decay. "Freezer doors open," Elena called from the dining room. "Should I close it?" "Don't go near it," I said quickly. "I'll handle it." But as I approached the kitchen, I saw someone standing inside the freezer. Marcus looked exactly as he had 2 weeks ago. Same uniform, same face, same nervous energy. He was arranging supply boxes on the wire shelving, working with the methodical efficiency of someone completing a routine task. "Marcus?" He looked up and smiled. "Hey, Jake. Just restocking for the morning delivery. Tommy asked me to handle the freezer inventory." Everything about the interaction felt normal, except for the context. Marcus was dead or vanished, or transformed into something that wore his appearance. He couldn't be casually reorganizing frozen supplies at 5:30 a.m. "You shouldn't be here," I said. "Why not?" "I work here." Marcus continued moving boxes, checking items off a clipboard that definitely hadn't been in the freezer before. "Night shift, remember? You trained me yourself." Elena appeared behind me, looking past my shoulder into the freezer. "Who's that?" I glanced back at her, then toward Marcus. But the freezer was empty again. No person, no clipboard, no sign that anyone had been inside. Just the usual supplies arranged on wire shelving, exactly as they'd been since the maintenance crew had forced the door open 2 weeks ago. "I thought I saw someone," I said lamely. "Probably shadows from the parking lot lights," Elena suggested. "This place has weird lighting angles." She walked past me and closed the freezer door, engaging the electronic lock with a simple button press. No resistance, no malfunction, just normal operation of normal equipment. But I'd seen Marcus as clearly as I was seeing Elena now. He'd spoken to me, acknowledged our shared history, acted like nothing unusual had happened. Either I was starting to hallucinate from stress and sleep deprivation, or the rules had been violated so severely that reality itself was becoming unstable. Tommy arrived at 6:30 to find Elena completing the closing checklist while I sat in the office, staring at the wall. "How did training go?" he asked Elena. "Pretty smooth. Jake knows the procedures really well. This place has some quirks, but nothing I can't handle." Tommy looked relieved. Elena was adapting to the night shift the way employees should, following protocols without overthinking them, treating supernatural occurrences as routine workplace anomalies. But I couldn't shake the image of Marcus arranging supplies in a freezer that had swallowed him 2 weeks earlier. Something was wrong beyond the usual wrongness, and I suspected it was only going to get worse. Elena lasted 6 weeks before she started asking the wrong questions. I'd been training her replacement, a quiet kid named David Hoffman from the community college, when she approached me during our break. We were sitting in my Honda, sharing coffee from the restaurant, while the radio played classic rock from Reading. "I've been thinking about the freezer," she said. "About Marcus." David looked up from his orientation paperwork. He'd been reviewing the rules for the 3rd time, taking notes in careful handwriting that reminded me of Joaquin's original protocols. "What about him?" I asked, though I already knew where this conversation was heading. "He disappeared on the night when both of you were working. You said the door malfunctioned, trapped him inside, but the maintenance report showed no mechanical problems. The electronic system was functioning normally when they cut it open." Elena had been doing research, asking questions around town the same way Marcus had. In a community like Bernie, stories about missing people traveled as fast as gossip about infidelity or financial troubles. She'd heard different versions of what happened that night, some more accurate than others. "Sometimes equipment fails in ways that aren't obvious," I said. "Or sometimes people lie about what really happened." David stopped writing and looked between us. He was smart enough to sense tension, but knew enough not to understand its source. Elena continued staring at me with the expression of someone who'd reached uncomfortable conclusions. "I think you know more than you're telling me. About Marcus, about this place, about why someone keeps posting job openings for night shift positions that nobody seems to keep very long." She was right, of course. I did know more than I was telling her. I knew that following the rules exactly was the only thing preventing all of us from joining whatever collection of spirits haunted this location. I knew that Marcus had been warned repeatedly, but chose rational skepticism over supernatural compliance. I knew that opening the freezer door had consequences that extended beyond simple disappearance. But I also knew that explaining these things to Elena would make her more dangerous, not less. Knowledge without acceptance led to the kind of intellectual rebellion that had destroyed Marcus. Better to let her draw her own conclusions and hope they kept her alive. "Sometimes people quit without notice," I said finally, "especially night shift workers. The hours are hard, the isolation gets to you, and some folks just walk away." Elena wasn't satisfied with my answer, but David was nodding along as if this explanation made perfect sense. He'd worked warehouse jobs before, understood how graveyard shifts could break people's spirits and send them looking for different opportunities. "I'm going to keep asking questions," Elena said. "That's your choice." But I knew her questioning would lead to the same destination Marcus had reached. A conviction that the rules were meaningless, that supernatural explanations were just elaborate psychological manipulation designed to control employees through fear. David finished his orientation packet that night and started full training shifts the following week. He followed the rules with the same practical acceptance Elena had shown initially, treating supernatural customers as just another category of difficult clientele. When the woman in the white dress returned, he served her the required items without questioning why a barefoot person might want ice cream at 3 a.m. Elena lasted another week before she stopped showing up for work. No dramatic confrontation, no announcement of her intentions, just an empty parking space where her car should have been. Tommy found her uniform folded neatly in the office, her name tag placed on top, her keys hanging from the register. Exactly like Joaquin. I'm still working the night shift at the Wendy's on Route 299. David's learning quickly, following protocols without the intellectual curiosity that causes problems. We serve customers who shouldn't exist, follow rules that don't make rational sense, and collect paychecks from a company that seems genuinely unaware of what happens in their restaurant after midnight. The rules keep us safe. That's all that matters. That's all that's ever mattered.